Welcome, everyone. Good day. Thank you for joining us today on this LinkedIn Live. We're here to explore how COSO framework strengthens governance, risk management, and internal controls, and why these issues matter to organizations today, particularly in the face of managing a great degree of uncertainty and complexity. I'm Mike DePrisco, IMA's President and CEO, and I'm proud to represent IMA as one of the 5 founding organizations of COSO. And today I am joined by 2 outstanding leaders, Lucia Wind, Chair of the COSO Board, and Larry White, IMA's representative on the COSO Board. Both of our speakers today bring deep expertise in governance and risk, in internal controls, and I'm excited to hear their perspectives on how the COSO framework is shaping our profession. Lucia is COSO's first full-time board chair and executive director, and she brings deep expertise in audit, risk, and internal controls across industries, including technology, retail, and government. Larry White is the IMA rep on the COSO board. He is former chair of the Global Board of Directors for IMA and a retired U.S. Coast Guard captain with extensive leadership in management accounting and profitability analytics. So our agenda today, as you see here, and our learning objectives, we're going to talk a little bit about COSO and explain and provide an overview of the COSO body of knowledge, and then get into some of the specific frameworks that we have available: internal control, enterprise risk management, and the fraud risk management guide. And then certainly we're going to talk a little bit about COSO's application to training and how we're putting some of the resources into use at IMA and how we work with our corporate partners throughout the world. And then last but not least, we will have a Q&A session. So be sure to stick around to hear from Lucia and Larry on various questions related to the framework. So with that said, it's my honor to now turn it over to Larry and Lucia, who are going to take us through some of the information provided here. Larry, over to you.
Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, COSO was established in 1985 in response to a savings and loan crisis that involved fraudulent financial reporting in a significant way. So COSO's coming up on in its 40th anniversary. So I think we can say that COSO is really reaching the point where its information is pretty well time tested. It has 5 sponsoring organizations that you see listed at the bottom of the page. They're all the major U.S. accounting organizations. And I want to encourage you to visit the COSO website and the COSO LinkedIn function, which have a great deal of content far beyond the frameworks and guides on internal control, risk management, fraud that we'll be discussing today. Now Lucia will explain some of the primary COSO documents.
Thank you, Larry, and hello, everybody. Very happy to be here. So as Larry mentioned, we have a lot of documentation on our website, many resources, but I'll highlight the few. Certainly our 2 frameworks, which are the ones that many companies and organizations may be familiar with, or which we're the most known for. And then also some additional guidance that we have issued that really kind of plays into this space as well. So our ICIF framework really came as a result of that study and the project from 1985. And there was actually a report as a result of that study that Larry mentioned that came out in 1987. And COSO really kind of went back to think through what were some of the issues behind internal controls failures in the U.S. markets, and provided a framework in their first report in 1992, which was our original ICIF framework. And as you can see, since then, we've gone through a few revisions to the framework. I'd say probably the framework got the widest adoption in the US markets and globally as well through companies that have a large global footprint. In 2002, when the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was passed here in the United States and had to be fully implemented by 2004, which really required companies to have a solid internal control framework foundation to both identify and establish internal controls and then also evaluate and test them periodically. Throughout that time, we also wanted to expand on the kind of the risk management aspect of what ICIF started with. And that was really when the efforts for enterprise risk management framework came out. I'd say this framework is unique and it's different than the risk assessment component of internal control framework because it's really intended to help organizations with their strategic efforts and successes and opportunities and risks. And so this particular framework is a standalone publication. It was established in 2004 and then recently revised in 2017 as well. There are two more documents that I think that I want to highlight to your attention, and one of them is our sustainability guidance, which we published in 2023, which really takes the ICIF framework and shows its adaptability to other areas of usage beyond financial reporting. And one of those is using it for climate disclosures and sustainability reporting, which obviously is a key subject area and requirement in the EU. So hopefully, if you're not familiar with this guidance, it is something you can go take a look at. It's free to download on our website. And again, it takes all of the great foundations from the internal control framework and translates it into sustainability reporting. The last piece of thought leadership that I'll mention, and this one we will talk about in more detail in this presentation as well, is our fraud risk guidance. So this was really a basis of one of our principles under ICIF and risk management is actually the requirement for companies to assess the risk of fraud. And so this particular guidance was established to expand on that topic and provide more thought leadership as to what companies can do to effectively set up risk management functions, assess fraud, and deter it as well. And we did an update to that publication in 2023. So that was kind of our thought leadership on in a snapshot view. Next slide, please. All right, so how does it all fit together? I love this particular image because it really outlines and shows our frameworks and our guidance in a kind of layered, peeled the onion view and how it all fits together. So really the foundation behind all of our thought pieces that we have published is a good governance layer, is that control environment that sets up the framework and the process for success. If you don't have the appropriate governance, decision-making, really the want and a need for the processes to be implemented effectively, and support systems, all of the other elements of this, whether it's enterprise risk management or fraud or internal controls, may not be fully utilized and deployed the most effective way if that governance layer is not there. So if you know our two frameworks, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, governance has always been a foundation of what we have done, and part of our thought pieces to set up that stage for the additional aspects and principles in those processes. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Larry.
Thank you, Lucia. So first up, we're going to talk about the internal control integrated framework and the famous COSO cube. The cube is important because it succinctly illustrates the dimensions and nature of the internal control framework. First, it shows on the front the 5 components, everything from the control environment, which touches on governance and many other aspects, down through specific monitoring activities and the 3 elements, components in between. Second, the framework is used for more than just financial reporting. That's what it was created for, but in its current iteration and in the latest update, it was expanded to cover operations, all types of reporting, and compliance, hence the sustainability document that was created and applies the COSO framework. The third dimension is the concept that internal controls must function at all levels of the organization, from the entity level, where they need to be monitored and looked at to make sure major corporate objectives are being achieved, to the detailed function level or process level in the organization. Next slide. As mentioned, the internal control framework has evolved from a focus on internal controls over financial reporting, which is still important and well established, but not the only use of it, to internal controls over operations, all reporting, and all compliance activity. The framework emphasizes principles to ensure adaptability to changes in an organization's business environment. So the framework also emphasizes evaluating the effectiveness of internal controls and ensuring they operate in an integrated manner throughout the organization. So if you're thinking about internal controls, purely as something your internal audit staff does, your organization has a long way to go, because internal controls need to be something that everybody does. Next slide. Here are the 5 components and the 17 principles of the internal control framework. Each principle is supported by a number of points of focus, which further define and illustrate the characteristics of each principle. I think you will find the framework provides a comprehensive and scalable approach to internal controls for any organization. Lucia will now provide some illustrations and examples of how it can be used.
You can move forward to the next slide, please. Thank you, Larry. And so what Larry will do throughout this presentation, he will kind of give you the overview of each one of the thought pieces we wanted to cover with you. And I will take on the role of giving you what I think is often a very important aspect of conversations within your company, whether it's with your senior leadership level or going to the board, and that is metrics and data. I have always found, as a former practitioner when I was in internal audit, that when I had those kind of tactical conversations with some data supporting why we needed to implement something, or why there was a better way to do it, or why it was a COSO framework that should come into play, having that data to back it up was really important. And so hopefully on the next few slides, I'll give you some of that for the internal control framework. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of reports, and so you can actually go to the previous slide. So there's a lot of data out there. I pulled a couple slides. So this is actually from a report that you can go and Google and look up. This is a great report that was pulled, and the name of the organization is down on the bottom with a proper reference to it. But it basically looked at all of the 2024 filings in the US market through the Edgar database, and did an analysis onto where are we still seeing internal control issues. What are companies struggling with, and what can be done about that. And the report is fairly lengthy, so I just kind of took 2 snapshots that may be helpful for your conversations within your organization before we go to the next slide. But really what you can see here is the top issues for 2024 were still around revenue recognition, inventory, vendor, and cost of sales. You have AR, tax, and then your intangibles and fixed assets. Kind of rounding up the way. What I actually thought was fairly interesting, and sort of telling the story of where we are in the post-pandemic world, is when you look at the bottom chart of where issues and control issues are still occurring and what is on a rise. Really, what has been rising fairly steadily since 2020 is your information technology issues and controls. And so ICIF is certainly something you can use for IT controls as well. As I thought about maybe what were some of the driving factors for why we're seeing that, I reflected on what we have all gone through over the last 5 years during the pandemic. And I think a lot of that for many companies was an exponential digital transformation that companies had to go through in order to stay relevant and continue operations. We all know during COVID, companies that didn't used to be remote went remote, had to enable technologies and software and tools to continue to do what they used to do while they were in the same building, talking to each other, getting things done in person, now had to be all done remotely. And so a lot of those softwares and technologies were deployed very quickly. And at times when we were in an in-person business environment, if you were to deploy a new technology, whether it was a new HR system or a new reconciliation system, it would take months. You would sit down with the right stakeholders, you would design the controls, you would figure out who needed what kind of user access. It had to go through several layers of reviews and approvals before you actually went live in a production environment. All of that during COVID had to be expedited fairly significantly. And that is potentially why likely we're seeing some of the issues in information technology on a rise, as well as you'll see segregation of duties being a key player of the 5 issues on this page as well. So if you have not gone back and kind of maybe done an assessment of what technologies you deployed during COVID or during the pandemic, and gone back and looked at their proper controls and design, maybe this could be a good project to take on to make sure that you have done everything the right way as you would have if you were in an in-person environment. So just a piece of thought leadership there. We can go to the next slide. So here is just few takeaways for ICIF as well. We already mentioned the sustainability report, which obviously is hopefully a key effort for a lot of you in the EU with the reporting requirements that you have. But certainly the ICIF can be used for a variety of internal reporting that you may have within your company. There's also a lot of international and local reporting requirements. I have very successfully actually used ICIF when I led internal audit functions for compliance with the India Companies Act of 2013. So that is a regulatory requirement for not only companies in India, but also in the US, for US companies or any company that has reporting requirements and operations in India. And so it was a really nice kind of way to just use something we were already using in the US and just deploy it to our other reporting requirements that we had, because it was established. It's a framework that we know works well, is reputable. And so it's an easy way to use ICIF and other reporting requirement or mechanisms that you have as a company. Certainly some of the other things to think about for ICIF to be used, use it for your new IT system deployments, right? Assess your control environment, see what your objectives and risks would be in your company, what controls you need to have in place, how are you going to monitor them. So as you kind of think through that COSO cube, all of that comes into play, even just for defining or establishing a process, even if you don't have reporting requirements. It sets the foundation in your company to use something that is proven and well established. I have also used it as a really great tool for cross-training and education of resources in a company. So sometimes you would be deploying resources and you had, for example, we had revenue accountants that would be on a rotational basis going into expense accounting and vice versa. But knowing that there was an established framework that the controls were based off on really kind of made that cross-training easy, because while they were learning new skills on a transaction side, they were all based on an established framework and a system of control within a company. So it was a great tool to kind of enable rotation of resources within an organization as well. Back to you, Larry.
All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit over to the enterprise risk management framework. And if you look to the right on the slide, the subtitle is very important: integrating with strategy and performance. So risk management is not something that's just done for the fun of it. The key is to make sure the focus is on value creation and value preservation throughout those processes. We've labeled the diagram the DNA diagram, And it illustrates that the 5 components illustrated by the colored ribbons, the 5 components of enterprise risk management must be embedded in the organization from its mission, vision, core values, through strategy development, business objective formulation, implementation, and performance, to the ultimate result, enhancing value creation. I actually like to think of this not as risk management. I prefer the term opportunity management, because business must take risks to advance and grow. Next slide. The ERM framework focus is on integration, bringing the concept of risk management to every element and every level as the company creates its strategy and monitors its performance. It includes expectations for the organization's governance and culture. It incorporates evolving technology and advances in decision making. Like the IC framework, the ERM framework is viewed as embedded and integrated throughout the organizations at all levels of management, not a standalone function off to the side. Next slide. Here are the 5 components of the ERM framework and the 20 supporting principles. The components are around governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, review and revision, and then information, communications, and finally reporting. And you can see that each is backed up by principles and a good deal of text in the framework about how to operationalize those principles. Lucia will provide some illustration of how ERM framework is used in practice.
Thank you, Larry. We can go to the next slide, please. Great. So again, more with metrics for me before we get to some of the practical uses or takeaways. So this particular report is actually a great report, and again, a fairly lengthy one. And I apologize if this is a bit of an eye chart with the bar charts over there, but you can go pull it down. I put the source on the bottom. It's actually a report that is done annually by the AICPA, so one of our other sponsoring organizations, together with North Carolina State University. It's a state of risk oversight report that really slices and dices the data around risk management and practices across the globe, and you can kind of understand the volume of participants and the data to make it more appropriate to your organization. But again, something that I have found to be very helpful when having conversations within the companies that I used to be part of. And so really what the story is on this page, what I'm trying to articulate is, if you can see it, great. If not, I'll let you know. So on the left-hand side in that particular chart is the volume and complexity of risks that companies are facing and how it's been coming at us over the past 5 years. And for the full sample size, it kind of breaks it down into large corporations, public companies, financial, not-for-profit. But for the full sample size, it has gone up from 59% to 65% over 5 years. And really what that says is, and how I interpret it is, we're facing complexities at a 65% times kind of ratio faster than we can absorb or comply with or implement. The chart on the right-hand side tells you that only 30% of the respondents actually have a robust or mature risk management program within their company. So we have this exponential pace of risks coming at us at companies, but only a third of the respondents even have an established program or framework or process to identify, absorb, mitigate, accept, really kind of disposition those risks that are coming at us as companies. And to kind of Larry's point, only a third of the organizations actually consider risk exposure when making capital decisions. So tying it back to your performance and your strategy, right? A risk conversation and risk management shouldn't be something you do on a tail end. It should be part of the conversation when you're establishing your strategy, revising your strategy, right? There's things that you should be taking into account that might come your way that you need to plan for, or in some cases accept and move on as you think about your strategy deployment to make sure you don't have setbacks as you're on your journey. And the one kind of interesting tidbit also in that report is that just over 50% of organizations actually, of the respondents to the survey, actually had a formally defined risk term, which is, again, a little bit scary of a statement when we have a pace of risk coming at companies fairly quickly. I think we all learn, hopefully, a lot about risk management and readiness, business continuity, again, during the pandemic, but also through the various geopolitical issues that we have been facing across the globe that may impact company performance and operations as well. And so really focusing on deploying the right risk management programs and enterprise risk management efforts is really crucial. And that is really where I think the COSO guidance comes in to be a very effective tool to do that. So as we move on to the next page to talk about a little bit about some of the takeaways, I would say use the opportunity to gather data that you can get your hands on. I know I mentioned a couple of reports by now. I'd say each one of the big four accounting organization puts out a data risk study every year that you can share and analyze, and really use data to support the conversation in your company and help educate your board of directors. I think when you have an educated board on risks specific to your organization, your industry, your environment, your country, and in what you do, it really helps to have a more educated or well-established risk management program, because that information and the communication, not just about risk, but also about opportunities, is flowing both ways throughout the company. One thing that I've seen companies usually struggle with when you talk about ERM, it's just deployment of another process. It's going to take more resources. It's going to add complexities to our existing process. And really, where it can be most effective when it's fit for the purpose of your organization. In my last company, I actually thought it was very beneficial when I actually sat down and mapped out all the various risk functions that we already had in the company. And you most likely already have that. If you don't have one or two, you probably have a few. And so when we actually sat down, we found out that we had a risk management process and a program for our cybersecurity program. We have one in finance around 10K risks. So if you were in the US, 10K risk, and you're filing for your annual report of 10K actually has a summary of key risks for your organization. Our compliance team was doing their own risk assessment and had a risk program. And we certainly had a program in our corporate liability insurance program, where you have to assess the risks in order to get the appropriate coverage for your company on an insurance side. And so once we actually brought all of these efforts in and started to share information, we came up with a fairly robust basis for an enterprise risk management program, and could provide a united front and an effort to our senior leadership and also our board, because they were not just hearing pieces of information from this risk function or that risk assessment. It was aggregated into an overview of the company that enabled better decision making at the end of the day, because they could put all of that together to paint a holistic picture for the company. So again, I think the ERM framework is very helpful, because you can easily bring all of those sources together and come up with your risk register that you can hopefully build a roadmap and set up the right tools and samples and improve that communication and information sharing within your company. Back to you, Larry.
All right, thank you for that insight, Lucia. The final document we'll discuss in some detail is the Fraud Risk Management Guide. The Fraud Risk Management Guide has two purposes. The first is to provide a detailed approach to complying with the internal control principle number 8, which says an organization considers fraud in assessing the risk of achieving objectives. The second purpose, and the purpose that really involves the entire document, is developing a comprehensive fraud risk management program. It's increasingly clear that fraud requires a much more specific and targeted approach to detect and deter the people who are going to attempt it. The 5-step program, which is illustrated on this slide, and you'll see more carefully in a few moments, are the components of a comprehensive fraud risk management program. Next slide. The Fraud Risk Management Guide is really focused on deterrence of fraud, building the kind of structure that deters people from even thinking about trying it against your organization or within your organization. It outlines fraud risk management assessment. It differentiates basic internal controls from fraud controls, which must be much more scheme specific. It includes extensive information on the use of data analytics for each of the 5 components of the comprehensive fraud risk management program. And the guide also makes available practitioner tools that will assist in implementation of a comprehensive fraud risk management program. Next slide. These are, in a much more readable fashion, the 5 principles to implement a comprehensive fraud risk management program. Fortunately, in my career, I've had little experience with fraud. But what I can say is that this guide, and I've read it carefully, is a very good read. It's very enlightening. It's filled with practical guidance. It has useful illustrations and anecdotes. It really delves into the idea of how data analytics can be used in a fraud prevention program. And I was completely impressed with those appendices on data analytics and when I dug into the practitioner tools. Lucia, who has more experience with fraud, will provide some practical insights and benefits of a stronger fraud prevention focus.
Thank you, Larry. And I will just echo, as a former practitioner, this particular fraud risk guide. I'm a certified fraud examiner, so it really kind of is near and dear to my heart, and a member of the ICIF as well, a great organization. But really the tools and templates and examples that come with a fraud risk guide are, for any practitioner, just absolutely amazing. I mean, it starts with giving you a template on the most common fraud schemes that you can then tailor to your organization. So you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper, which is always difficult when you're trying to think through what could happen in your company. But you're starting with a set of fraud risk schemes that you can then tailor and adapt and really kind of have a brainstorming discussion in your company to say, okay, maybe this one doesn't apply, but maybe a variation of that does. And so when you have those samples and that guidance as part of a publication, I think that's really, really useful to the company. And Larry often hears me say that in board meetings when I use as a former practitioner, how could this be used in a company? Because I think it's really key to make sure that the guidance is widely adopted. So enough about that. By getting back to metrics, so I promised you metrics for each one of the sections, and here's your one on fraud. So this particular report is a great report that I think this is the 13th edition. Maybe it's more than that, that it's been issued every year. It's issued by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which is actually the company that co-wrote our fraud risk guide with us. That's who we partner with to be the lead author of this publication. They are the subject matter experts in the space of fraud risk management and assessment. And so they put out this report, and I have used this one in a boardroom many a time to try to get management's attention and board's attention on the importance of fraud risk management, but also prevention and deterrence, as we mentioned in the guide for the 2023 publication. And so the one number that I would always pinpoint to is that 5%. So this study basically estimates that organizations lose close to 5% of revenue to fraud every year. That is the estimate based on cases reported. And it's, you can see in a chart, it's almost 2,000 cases from all across the world. This particular report is, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 pages long. So you can go and just study your specific region To get the more precise data, you can just look at your specific industry to be able to dice it and slice it more appropriately to your needs. But 5% of revenue is lost to fraud in each company per year. That is an estimate, right? And so take that number and apply it to your company. As you're sitting there right now, think through what is your annual revenue? What is 5% of that? And would your CFO or your audit committee or your board be okay knowing that you're potentially losing that amount of revenue to fraud every year? And I often said, let's say your company is absolutely fantastic, and let's say your company loses 1% to fraud. That still could be a very, very sizable number that should be worth your attention and your company's attention to make sure that you have the right fraud risk assessment and management processes. So there is a few more data sets on here where you can kind of shows you the median loss and average loss per case. Obviously, when you go to more of the financial statement, fraud-related schemes, the volume and the amount tends to be much higher than if you go to the smaller areas of fraud, such as asset misappropriation or sometimes billing schemes. So again, a lot of great data in this report for companies to utilize for the conversation in your company, in your organization, and with your board. If you go to the next page, please. Great, thank you. So kind of the first few data sets are pretty repetitive from ERM, but again, educate your board. Have them understand if you're struggling with resources, getting resources to set up a program or at least set up some efforts on your journey to fraud risk management. Share some of this data with your board, with your company, to show them how much money you potentially could be using, and if a fraction of that could be used to deploy, even if it's technologies, it doesn't necessarily have to be additional headcount, right, to get better reporting and better data within your company. You can certainly make this fit for purpose. Again, if you are a risk practitioner or you are in accounting or finance, there are likely already parts of your organization that have metrics that they have established that they utilize to measure themselves or monitor. And so it's just a matter of getting those data sets and those matrices together and looking at them. I guarantee you accounts payable has their transactions data reporting that they monitor. Same thing with HR, how many employees they onboard and offboard. You can bump that up again. Asset management. So if we're onboarding and offboarding all of these folks, are we terminating their access appropriately to systems? So these data sets already exist. And I think if you map them, and it could be a simple pivot table, it could be another data analytics tool that you're using, whether it's Power BI to bump it up against each other, you could probably have the basis of a good fraud risk management program in its infinite stage. What I really like about the guide is the fact that it highlights processes and areas. If your maturity and fit for purpose is just to have a robust, or at least to set up a fraud risk assessment process, which many companies, that's really what they do. They just have fraud risk assessment, and they don't actually get the fully develop their fraud risk management program. There is information in the guide if you just have that fraud risk assessment function. And then, of course, if you have more maturity or you are in a segment that actually requires more mature processes for regulatory reporting, such as, if you're in a financial sector, then certainly fraud risk management program would be a requirement for you to have effectively deployed. Then there's information around that. But again, the tool guide is great. It's got sample policies, templates, even sample data analytics you can run. So it's a great startup guide for anybody on their journey to fraud risk assessment or fraud risk management. Larry, back to you. Actually, this is probably me.
Actually, I was going to say, why don't you take it?
It's my slide. All right, so as we kind of covered the three big topics, the good news is if you are into continuous education and continuous learning, for each one of the topics that we covered today, so internal control framework, the fraud risk management guide, as well as the enterprise risk management framework, COSO has developed a certificate program that you can take to get certified in these areas and these frameworks. It's a great tool for talent development on your teams or for yourself as well. You can find out more. I kind of listed 3 different sites you can access to get this training, certainly through the main COSO website, but also through your IMA resources. I will highlight the fact that as IMA members, if you are a member, you are eligible to member discount for the training. So please utilize that. It's a great opportunity. We offer the same discount scenario to the other sponsoring organizations. So if you're attending and you're not an IMA member, but you might be an AICPA member, you can get the same discount, or the IIA as well. But for your local resources in the EU, there's a link to the programs over there as well. The trainings, the enterprise risk management and the internal control, are available in a virtual kind of on-demand format, so you can sign up for it, and actually the fraud risk management as well. You can sign up for it, do it at your own pace. You can pick it up, you can let it go for a little bit, and so it's a great opportunity for you to, if you don't have dedicated time frame to get this done, you can kind of work at it at your own pace to get that certificate program and get it completed. It's all online. And I think it's just a great resource to round up anybody's professional experience and your professional learning and advancement. The nice thing is you also will get a cute little badge you can put into your LinkedIn profile to show your learning and your advancement. So if that is something that is important to you, you will get that little badge that you get to display next to your name on your LinkedIn profile as well. But Mike, I'll maybe hand it over back to you in case there's anything more you can share on behalf of the IMA that I might have missed or that you want to add.
No, thank you, Lucia, and thank you, Larry, for the conversation, the perspective, the insights. I particularly enjoyed how you brought data and metrics to the presentation to underscore some of the points that you were making in terms of the value of applying these frameworks and guides in organizations. I do know we have some time for Q&A, and I want to make sure we jump into that. And for those that are dialed into this call, feel free to type in questions into the comments or chat within the LinkedIn Live platform, and we will be sure to respond to those questions following this call. We do have some questions that we developed ahead of this session that we think are important and relevant to this conversation. And you can see, of course, we have some contact information here on this slide. If you are interested in exploring these frameworks, guides, and certification programs, our team stands ready to help support. But I want to start, and maybe the first question can go to Larry, because Larry, you've been with IMA for quite some time. You've served as chair. You're well published and known for your expertise in the management accounting area. And when you think about these frameworks, why do you think they're well suited for those that work in management accounting in business? Can you comment on some of the benefits for those individuals?
Well, yeah. The first thing is they provide for internal control, for enterprise risk, and for fraud risk. They provide a very clear approach. So they're comprehensive. You're going to understand a lot if you're not an expert in that topic. And then you're going to find that some aspects of each framework are more important to your organization, and certainly the philosophy behind each of the frameworks is important to understand and share with your boards and senior leadership. So even if you just read the frameworks, they're really a get smart quick approach to this topic with a strong implementation focus. And I'm not completely sure we mentioned it, but with the training program, while they're available individually, the internal control and enterprise risk management are available for live presentation if you have a team of people. So, and I think we're going to try to do something with fraud risk in that regard too over the next, 6 months to a year. But that's what makes them valuable. The other thing is sometimes you don't realize what you're missing. And people throughout the organization, they want to know that their objectives that they set and that are agreed upon are going to be achieved. And so you need the controls around that to make sure every level of the organization can show that it's working on the correct objective, that it's considering the correct risks. And, you know, for fraud, which again, I don't have much experience with, you need to consider how your company can be cheated if that's a possibility. I hope that answers the question a bit, Mike. Lucia may have something more to add.
Absolutely. One thing I would add, since you brought it up related to the training, one of the things that we're actually working on now, our team in Europe within IMA, we're working with the United Nations agency to deliver a 2-day on-site training program where the organization leaders and members that are participating can really think about how to apply these frameworks within the context of their own organization challenges, right? And where they see opportunities. So in that way, these frameworks, these training programs could be tailored, right? In a way that makes the most sense for an organization. We also are working with a leading bank in Austria where some of their team members are focused on the enterprise risk management certificate, while others are focused on the internal control framework certificate. So in that way, right, the organization identified a unique opportunity to bring multiple training programs to the practitioners in their organization. So there's a lot of use cases out there. I know our team in Europe and elsewhere are eager to work with organizations and happy to help organizations that see this need. So let me ask, and maybe Lucia and Larry, you can answer this question. You know, there's a lot of certificate programs in the market on various topics, whether it's risk, whether it's fraud, those kinds of things. What do you really think separates COSO's programs from maybe others that exist in the market?
So I'm happy to start with that
Lucia,
one.
do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike, and then Larry, maybe you chime in with what you're seeing. But I think as a former practitioner now in my current role, where I really truly see the COSO certificate programs playing a key role is typically when you have a certification or certificate, it's on a standard, it's on a regulation, it's on a larger topic. Not very often is it on something that helps you comply with that particular requirement. So it tells you what it is, it tells you what you're supposed to do. What I feel like it's really helpful with the COSO certificate program, whether it's ICIF or ERM, it is the content and the body of knowledge is how to help an organization implement something to help support that particular area. And so you heard us mention guides, templates, points of focus, ideas. And so this is really where you kind of get that practical knowledge to help support whether it's a law, regulation, reporting requirement that you may have as a company, which I think is very valuable because it really provides you with that knowledge, but also you kind of get the accreditation then at the end of it through the certificate program to test your body of knowledge and to demonstrate the resources are well versed in your organization to do what needs to be done. And again, something like the ICIF can be used across. You've heard us mention this right a few times on the call. Can be used across various areas. So it's not just financial reporting, right? It could be operations. It could be other regulatory reporting that you might have. It's truly universal, and I think there's very few certificate programs out there like that enable you to do that. Larry?
Yeah. No, that's great. Larry, would you add anything?
I would just say COSO is probably the best known internal control source of knowledge, and if I think it's also the best known in enterprise risk management and certainly fraud it's up there, and we've partnered with ACFE for that. But the point is, this is the core knowledge. No matter where you go, if they don't cover this core knowledge, they're missing something.
Yeah.
And I just got to say, go to COSO, because we've done the work. We put all this material out for extensive review and in many cases public exposure, and we've done our level best to make sure that this is the core knowledge necessary for these functions.
Yeah. I think you said it great at the top. You said it's time tested, right? 40 years, and the organizations represented within COSO are well regarded. I really like the integrated approach. I think, Lucia, you showed that chart of how each of the frameworks and the guides builds on each other, and it's all integrated. You don't always get that type of quality, rigorous content in other types of offerings that exist on the market. So I think that's great. I do want to talk a little bit about technology. There isn't a presentation I attend where the topic of AI and automation doesn't come up. So I thought it'd be good for us to talk about it here. How's it changing the way automation, AI, how's that changing the way organizations are applying the framework for governance, risk management, internal controls? What are you seeing and hearing? And whoever wants to start is fine.
Go ahead, Lucia.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So the nice thing about the COSO frameworks is we have over the years provided additional guidance on various subject matter expertise that are kind of the offshoots of the main guidance. So we actually try to stay very relevant on what the market wants and needs are. We have a paper out on AI. We just issued one in terms of how you can use ICIF for robotic process automation, which is, to talk about technology and rapid deployments in companies and automating processes and decision making for transactions, right? And so the nice thing about ICIF is it is almost like an evergreen publication. I mean, we will do updates to it, and we have done updates to it, but it can truly be deployed to various areas. It's not just specific to financial reporting. And again, we see it being used for RPA, AI, really kind of any kind of, digital transformation in a company. It can be brought into the conversation to make sure you have the right foundation and you set up, like you said, the governance layer, right? Which is your decision making around a process, a new system deployment. You assess your objectives, what you're trying to achieve, and the risks. You map your controls, and then you monitor them. And that kind of really takes you through that life cycle of ICIF.
Yeah, for sure. Larry?
Yeah, and I just, technology, AI, I've seen it provide a huge amount of benefits over the years, but you always need to come back to the core function, the core processes, the core goals and objectives, and say, how will this tool enable me to do it better? And am I focusing it on the right area for this company? And when you come back to the COSO framework, you're really getting down to the core knowledge and the core functions associated with what you're doing, and you're gonna then apply the technology in a sensible, high return manner in every case. And today with more technology, increasing elements of transactions and are hidden, and internal controls and assessing risk and even fraud schemes have to go inside that and make sure it's not so hidden that someone can take advantage or misrepresent them.
Yeah, I think the technology surfaces a whole new set of potential risks and need for internal controls that, as you said, this core fundamental foundational knowledge can really be applicable and valuable for organizations. So yes, I think I agree with you 100% there. I do want to wrap it up. We're at the close to the top of the hour here. We've given a lot of great information, as well as resources, links, contact information on how those that are dialed in can find out more information. Excuse me. Our team at IMA stands ready to support individuals or corporations that are looking to adopt any of the frameworks or guides in their organizations. We do have a corporate membership program where organizations get access to COSO. As Lucia already said, IMA members get discounts as well as resources to support the implementation of these types of programs in your organization. So please reach out if you have any questions or want some support. Well, Lucia and Larry, I'd like to thank you for taking the time today to share your wisdom, your insight, your perspective. I know it's a topic that you're very passionate about. COSO's doing tremendous work. I know you're going to continue to provide great knowledge and perspective to the market. I want to thank you again. And for everyone that joined us, thank you. This is being recorded, so you can always come back and listen to it later. But thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and have a great day. That closes our session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.